Does anyone else live on Capitol Hill? Is it just me? Anybody else? It was an adventure. I had not one, not two, but 3 motorcades this morning, my friends, which is my DC record. It was very exciting to have launched the day with a new PR. So good morning and welcome to the first of 2 sessions today at our sort of mini cyber symposium. This morning I am delighted to welcome Rob Lee, the CEO and co-founder of Dragos, Phil Venables, the Chief Information Security Officer for Google Cloud, as well as a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology and a CFR member, and Tara Wheeler, our Senior Fellow for Global Cyber Policy, as well as the CEO and founder of Red Queen Dynamics. I wanted to start by asking each of our panelists to just give us a brief explanation of what they do in this particular space, how they came to it, and how they see themselves in this space. Because I think that sometimes for those who don't come from cybersecurity, it can feel like a sort of overwhelming, not the most human area. And what we have are 3 panelists who are deeply thoughtful and human in their approach to this topic. And so Rob, can I start with you?
Sure. So everything I focus on ends up being operations technology. So everything you've probably heard about tends to be what we refer to as that enterprise information technology, cloud infrastructure, computing systems in the enterprise, et cetera. Everything I focus on is those digital systems that operate gas turbines, power systems, rail, the underlining of data centers. So kind of IT plus physics would be really that area. I started my career in the US Air Force, spent most of my time over the National Security Agency, built out the government's first mission looking at state actors breaking into industrial sites around the world. Got involved in pretty much every major incident you've heard about in that field, from leading the investigations in Ukraine in 2015, which was the first time ever a cyber attack took down electric power, to getting involved with an attack in Saudi Arabia in 2017, which was the first time an adversary tried to kill people through a digital attack, all the way up to recently with the Colonial Pipeline and leading the sort of operations portion of that incident response. So everything my firm and I focus on is trying to make sure that the critical part of critical infrastructure is getting protected, because that impacts our livelihood, safety. It's all the revenue of your companies as well. But most importantly, I got 2 kids and 1 on the way, and I'd like them to have lights and water when they grow up.
Of all of the things that you just said, the thing that I find most impressive is that you went for 3. Because the idea of going for 3 was terrifying to me.
My wife is a German Bavarian. We're probably going to have like 4 more.
But you'll have a really compact European band.
I'll have my own little microgrid eventually to support them. Yeah.
Phil, how about you?
Yeah, so my background is I'm a software engineer. By background, worked on energy, finance, telecom, defense applications, and like many people of my generation, I never set out to be a security person. I stumbled into it and got stuck doing it for many years in financial services. Came to Google about 3 years ago. One of my main focus areas at Google is just how do we make security and resilience easier for everybody by embedding this stuff in a platform that everybody else can build on, whether it's cloud or whether it's all of the other types of Google services. And so me and my team get up every day thinking about how we can make the secure path the easier path for everybody.
And Tara?
I am a person who ended up taking systems apart a lot when I was a kid, and I wanted to understand how things worked. And I think that there's a good combination of people who end up in cybersecurity who used to get into a lot of trouble. And I used to get into a lot of trouble, and that was sometimes bad trouble, sometimes good trouble, but mostly what it landed me with was a series of skills in technology and in speaking that lets me translate across a complicated technology to people that don't understand it and need to for their own lives. And it landed me in a place where I find myself and our team building technologies and building ways for small businesses to understand their cybersecurity responsibilities, attest to them, and then enter the defense industrial base. So a lot of small businesses, a lot of IT providers in this country don't understand what they need to do to stay safe. And I've talked about this a couple times before. I think cybersecurity is a combination of a technologist who also just can't believe everybody else isn't seeing the wreckage this could become if we didn't take some precautions around it. So I guess an overdeveloped sense of responsibility and mischief maybe landed me in this seat.
And we have almost 70 members joining us on Zoom, by the way, so I want to greet our audience online as well. And Tara, I want to, Phil, I have a question for you, but before I turn to that, Tara, I want to ask you, when you say defense industrial base, what do you mean?
When I'm talking about the defense industrial base, I'm talking about the fourth and third party suppliers to the large contractors that supply and provide supplies, technology, munitions to the US military, frankly. When you think about the organizations that are manufacturing MREs or putting them in trucks and getting them to National Guard bases in Iowa, I think of the 30-person trucking company that doesn't understand how to fill out a data privacy form so that they can be entered in as a potential vendor for those National Guard bases. And frankly, we don't really want to have the fact that 100x number of MREs and ammunition cases are being shipped to a specific location in this country to be readily available public information. And yet the companies doing it don't understand how to secure that information. And they're part of the defense industrial base, the people supplying the US military.
Perfect, thank you. So Phil, you are a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And this week, you have launched a strategy for cyber-physical resilience. Can you walk us through what's in the strategy? Why is this a big deal? Why is it important?
Right. So we in fact, it was like last month, the report was kind of released. This PCAST report on cyber physical resilience. So it was kind of, unusually for a report in the government, those three words actually say most of things about the report. So the cyber physical piece, so we recognized, and the reason was PCAST, along with many other things that PCAST does, wanted to produce a report to the president on this, was basically to recognize that we can no longer think of our cyber systems as being separate from our physical systems. We've taken across all of our critical infrastructure, whether it's water, energy, healthcare, telecoms, all of these things, we've taken a bunch of systems that were designed to only work in isolation. They were never designed for the security expectations that we have now. And we've basically wired everything together. So the cyber world and the physical world have merged in some quite dangerous ways. And then the resilience part comes from the fact that we need to recognize that while security is very much a clear goal, that we have to be able to prevent and defend attacks, we can never, and no credible security person will ever say we can achieve 100% security. So we have to plan not just to be able to recover systems, but to be able to operate systems perhaps in some degraded states in the face of outages, natural disasters, cyber attacks, and other events. And so all of the recommendations in the report are about how do we go about achieving that. And I'm not going to spend like 10 minutes obviously going through the report, but probably the biggest things in it about how do we as a society in the private and public sector that collectively run this cyber physical infrastructure for the nation, how do we set more ambitious performance goals, and how do we connect the tone at the top of organizations that pound the table, that say security and resilience are important, how do we connect that with the actual resources in the ranks that needs to actually do the work? And so thinking about how do we set more ambitious goals and connect the tone at the top with the resources in the ranks to actually make more change in society is what the report is all about.
That's great. And Rob, I'm going to turn to you. We recently saw Russian hackers breach a water system in Texas. Can you connect what you saw there with what Phil is saying in terms of the lack of connections that we have right now and how we need to think about security differently?
Yeah, when he's talking about cyber-physical, a type of cyber-physical is operational technology, so same domain. And as he mentioned, there's a lot of systems across the world, and we see this a lot in the US as well, where it used to be this antiquated legacy, maybe analog type control system, the things that were operating the water filtration units, the water pumps, et cetera. And by necessity, we've moved those to more digital systems, and they're starting to get connected, sometimes even without the owner of that facility really understanding it, just as their vendors and contractors sort of help them out to get to the next phase. And as a result, the attack surface has then sort of blown up. So you have adversaries and criminals and non-state actors as well as state actors that can just reach across the internet to grab those systems, and anything that system can do naturally, they can do with it. If I can overflow a water tank as the operator making a mistake, so can a Russian ransomware group. And so we're starting to see us move in this path where, call it 15 years ago, we would still see all these compromises. We'd see China, Russia, Iran take a swing at getting into these industrial sites. That's not new. But what's new is a level of connectivity is allowing them now to do damage, to do physical consequence. And we're seeing adversaries that are actually now bold enough to do it. And so there's been multiple sites across the United States that's been hit, but they're local and they're smaller, so they don't make the big time national news. A couple years ago, Oldsmar, Florida, somebody tried to dump chemicals to try to poison the water for the town. 3 different attacks here in the US in the last year where there were overflowing tanks and impacting local providers. That same issue they're facing, the large players face as well. And again, I think there's the idea of let's think deterrence, let's think artificial intelligence, let's think quantum encryption. What's the next thing that's going to save us? And in reality, a lot of these companies just need to do the basics. It's the foundations. We have the technology, we have the insights. Very often it's an economic issue or a policy issue. If you want to help out a small water facility, even government grants and work at government, et cetera, they're too small to even know how to fill out that grant, kind of what Tara was talking about. Or even the larger players may not have the economic ability to do it. A gas pipeline is often considered a monopoly in its territory, so the rates are governed by like a Public Utilities Commission or similar, and they're not able to pass the security cost into the rate. Therefore, they can't make the security decisions. So there's just us tripping ourselves over, and that problem is only going to get much worse as we go much more digital, much more sort of standardized across the industry.
So I was having dinner recently with one of the sort of leading cybersecurity diplomats from another country, and one of the things I pointed out is the joys of federalism. How federalism in the United States complicates this in ways that I think if you're looking at the United States as a nation as a whole from the outside, it's really easy to under-index on the complexity of that. So Phil, you've seen an enormous amount of different voluntary standards come out from different governmental organizations, and we're seeing standards come out at the federal level, at the state level. We're seeing, industry standards coming out. So there's a really complex array. And then there's also different compliance requirements. Can you walk us through, on the Google side, when you're thinking about large-scale infrastructure, how are you trying to secure these things against those standards? But also, where do you see the fundamental gaps, essentially, in trying to adopt those standards?
Yeah, so from a Google perspective, clearly we're a very large global infrastructure, and so on the one hand, because of that scale, have a lot of challenges, but on the other hand, because of that scale, we have an easier time of this that we can deploy more resources. So we've been focused heavily on security by design. How do you build in security, not bolt it on? How do you think about resilience by design? A whole array of other things. So generally speaking, we pay a lot of attention to different standards, regulations. We're held accountable by our customers and governments to meet those, and we're generally focused on that. When you flip it around, though, to kind of the broader point, when you look at some smaller organizations and other less well-resourced organizations, it can often be challenging to meet these standards, and then in turn, there should be higher expectations of them relying on large technology companies, service providers, the specialist software providers in those industries to implement a higher level of control, because many small, medium-sized businesses, many local utilities, they don't have the expertise or the funding to be able to do all this for themselves. So there should be a more significant expectation on these the organizations that can do this. In the PCAST report, for example, we call out this kind of 80-20 problem that 80% of the risk in society is due to kind of 20% of the underlying service providers because of the commonality across many industries. And you can think of kind of, woe is me, there's so much kind of concentration risk there. But then that's a massive opportunity, because if you can do that uplift in that smaller set of critical providers, you can have a wide-ranging effect. And you see this pattern in every sector. There's a small set of core technology, service, and other types of providers. There may not be kind of well-known household names in individual industries. There's very kind of niche providers. But if you can get them to improve, it has this wide-ranging effect across the industry.
And Tara, I want to turn this over to you, because you literally learned to fly in part so that you could get to like the small company with the guy who like makes tin. And so I want to hear from you, because you have built your company to really work with mom and pop operations. When you're listening to Phil and you're thinking like about that complexity, what are you seeing on the ground when you are, I mean, your company signed the Secure by Design pledge last week with Jen Easterly of CISA at RSA. What are you seeing when you're talking to people, got a random company in a random small town in America, what are they up against?
Well, they're up against a stifling of innovation, I think, in two different ways. First, in terms of the expectations that are often pushed out towards them in terms of compliance expectations as they sell into larger companies. And second, in the way that the way that we build technology in this country is we let people who like shiny things give you money and then you build things for them, right? And the challenge that I often see when I talk to mom and pop organizations, when I talk to small to mid-size enterprise, is that people aren't first innovating and developing solutions that help them to get safer and more secure in a way that understands not that they're smaller than an enterprise, but fundamentally different than a large enterprise that can afford to bring compliance experts in-house. What I find when I listen to Phil, when I've talked to enterprise before, it is that in reality what happens on the ground is those small organizations that end up supplying larger organizations, I'm thinking about FANG on a lot of different levels, end up having 400 question, 51-page vendor assessment process questionnaires pushed towards them and said, address these as best you know how, and if you do good enough, we'll let you sell to us. That's actually the origin story for my company. Was about 5 different people I knew asked me for help just getting set up to get through vendor assessment processes and portals. And after about the 5th person asked me, and every single time I'd been doubling my price, because capitalism, right? Every single time that happened, I doubled my price. And at the end of it, I was like, I don't have a service here. This is an area of innovation that's missing, serving these smaller businesses who are experiencing this problem. And yet, there's not really a path towards creating a company in this country that works on boring problems. The kinds of problems that Rob has mentioned before are low level. They are multi-factor authentication. You know, the codes you get on your phone. They have to do with making sure that no one shoved a rock into the door of the server room to keep it physically open. They have to do with whether or not the people who are in water treatment facilities are remembering that they have to turn the lights off at the end of the night or unplug machinery when they walk away from it. These are very basic concepts, and yet they feed into whether or not a small business can sell into and become part of a larger supply chain. And yet, that innovation for those small businesses is often stifled by the very thing that we're trying to create, which is that an organization that already has its act together on compliance may be the one that's chosen by default for larger enterprise and for the military to supply it. That's stifling the competition amongst small and innovative businesses that might be able to compete in the defense industrial base, finding new technologies, new, more efficient ways and processes of supplying the U.S. military. And yet, because they are small, they're fast, they're agile, but they don't have their game together on compliance, they can't get those magic waivers on the cybersecurity maturity model certification process that the Defense Department requires to just sell into the DoD. So I see some stifling of innovation here. It's an interesting challenge. It's a difficult problem to work on. It's why I like working on it, but it is hair pulling most of the time, honestly, is seeing the lack of capacity, the lack of understanding, and the lack of translation of those compliance standards to something meaningful that small businesses can operate on in this country and succeed.
Yeah, and if I could,
Yeah.
on the topic of regulation, just 2 policy recommendations that would help. Number 1, we absolutely need to harmonize regulation in this country. You have big electric companies, as an example, that have jurisdiction with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You have TSA. You then also have NERC under FERC. Depending on that, you also have your state and local that are trying to develop their standards. It is very common that a single power company has 5 or 6 different regulatory regimes that are competing in their interests. So we're overspending without actually accomplishing much. The second policy recommendation is, I'll stand up here all day long and say, hey, that cyber physical stuff and OT is very, very different than IT. But even inside of enterprise IT, you'll find a power company needing something different than a rail company. And so on a policy level, we've spent too much time trying to tell people how to operate their infrastructure, telling them how to implement security. This is a good control. And that's not necessarily the truth when it comes to how those companies operate. At a policy level, the government needs to get a lot better at why. Sort of why are we doing this? What is the requirement? What is the concern that we have? What is the outcome we want the companies to achieve? And to let the asset owners and operators do the how. And that's the best method I've seen work, and we've seen it work before under FERC with a couple of things that they've done. So those two sort of positions are things that can make regulation and compliance in this country actually more meaningful to the security outcomes.
And I think the only thing I'd add to both of that is and let organizations consume and reuse the certifications of the providers they use. Oftentimes, large tech companies or small tech companies that are these service providers will have all of the audits and certifications, and they hand that off to the small business that wants to use them, but then some other regulation will require that small business to do a fresh risk assessment as opposed to just pass through the certification. And there's some very simple issues that could make a big difference to organizations.
I love anything where we have a strong argument that paperwork is a national security threat. Yeah. I am here for that discussion. And what strikes me as interesting about this, Rob, to your point, so I spent many, many years overseeing foreign assistance programming to provide digital safety training and digital security training to activists and journalists and vulnerable populations across about 90 countries. And one of the things that we would constantly have to work through was how do you report on impact, right? How do you, and there would be a push from the government, right, from the funder to say, tell us who is safer. And I would always have to go back and say, we cannot tell you who is safer. We have no capacity to tell you that they're safer because of this. What we're pushing for is like spidey sense. Like what we're pushing for is some sense of empowerment and agency to say, this doesn't feel right, or I should figure this out, or this feels like it could be a problem, like the ability to sort of get in there. And it feels, what's interesting to me hearing you say that is that it feels like there's some element of that then with the small businesses as well. Like, this is what I should be getting to. How I'm going to do that is going to require some innovation on my side. There's been a lot of discussion this year around critical infrastructure and potential Chinese incursions into critical infrastructure, Russian incursions, the upcoming elections, a potential invasion of Taiwan, and how that could be used. What in that debate, Rob, do you hear as sort of maybe hype cycle or fear mongering, like putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable, if you will? And what do you think we're not looking at closely enough? And that we should really be paying attention to?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, over the years, I've definitely pushed back against the hype cycle on this stuff. And look, I love our federal partners, but nobody stands in front of Congress without asking for budget, it seems. And so there's always some pitch being made. And there's been a lot of things that have been hyped up over the years. I'm not so sure too much of this is hype these days, in the sense that, again, 15 years ago, China breaking into electric systems, it's happened. But they were getting into the enterprise IT networks. They were trying to steal stuff. It's bad, but it's not like, oh my gosh, the lights are going to go out. This latest one was getting into the right locations, at the right targets, to embed in the right infrastructure to be able to do consequence attacks. Russia developing capabilities to employ and then getting into the right locations. I'm actually thinking we might be underselling it a little bit, where if you just look at something and go, here's what's going to happen, I think that's a very poor job. Like, as a prior Intel analyst, I would never try to predict the future. But I'm a big fan of forecasting and saying, look, here's where the hurricane is going. Here's what we've seen, consistently seen. Here's the next move they made. They've been consistent for the last 15 years. This is a very predictable outcome we're looking at. And I think the focus with the China and Taiwanese issue is very, very real. And I think everybody has well understood in the national intelligence community that cyber as a component of influence and cyber attacks on infrastructure is very much in the cards. And we've had these near misses time and time again, and nothing ever happens. In Ukraine in 2015, I remember getting back, briefing the White House, people around it, they prepared a Rose Garden speech for the president to go out and talk about it, just to acknowledge that the attack had happened and that targeting civilian critical infrastructure is off limits. Not saying we'll do anything about it, but just even acknowledge it. And the advisors pulled him back and said the American people have trouble understanding why they should care about something in Ukraine, and this just doesn't seem like something we should get involved in, which just sent a giant signal to anybody doing attacks that we're not even willing to talk about it, let alone do something. Same thing happened in 2016. Again, was working with the Trump administration. Same thing, didn't want to talk about it. Colonial Pipeline, the first time we even say something, and it's really not about the attack, it's more about the impact, and it wasn't even the cyber component of it that we discussed, and there was still no let's do something about it. So I think we have lost all credibility in doing anything against these attacks. We've expanded the attack surface. We've seen our adversaries get really smart about how to target these systems, and we're seeing it happen around the world at record numbers. I don't want to contribute to hype, but I'm confused at where the hype is currently.
You know, and it's interesting. So, you know, one of the things in the PCAST report we called out related to what Rob was saying is that our adversaries have a better understanding and map of our critical infrastructure than we do of ourselves. And one of the recommendations in the report that we're hoping DHS and the National Risk Management Center will continue to champion is the creation of what we're calling a National Critical Infrastructure Observatory, which is a capability that we can map ourselves, look for the dependencies, look for the concentration risks, look for all of these things that if an event happens, these are the places we need to defend the most proactively, and effectively have in essence, a digital twin of the United States critical infrastructure that we can outmatch our adversaries in knowing where the risk points are and the likeliest points of threat that we can get ahead of those types of things.
And Phil, what's a digital twin?
Digital twin is you know, it's an industry-wide concept where you build a digital replica of physical infrastructure and you manage the digital replica, and then that automatically updates the actual physical infrastructure. In this case, it would just be basically the ability to monitor and show what's happening in that wider infrastructure.
It's sort of a quick, hard-hitting fact, because I've worked on this problem, not on that piece, but on like what is critical infrastructure in this country. And there's a variety of lists.
Literally was my next question,
okay,
so
never
thank
mind.
you. Perfect.
No, oh, you want
No,
me
no,
yeah,
no,
okay,
go
all
for
right.
it.
So when you look at, I don't do the read ahead of the questions. You send them out. I like the organic, so I never actually read them, so that's my fault. Everybody claims to have lists. So I'm a Department of Energy employee as well, looking at how we design the electric system of the future on their advisory committee piece. And they'll come out and say, well, we have DCEI. DCEI is the list that's critical. Military will say we have the Section 9 list, and that's our critical sites. And like I was involved in the creation of some of those, and the critique was always, you're just looking at what the biggest sites are. And those are really important, and we'll talk about small business, but the big sites are in trouble too. But they just go, this is the biggest substation, therefore it's on the list. But it might be a distribution substation that feeds a certain port that allows our ability to put troops in the South China Sea, and it's not on anybody's list. So like what is critical infrastructure in this country is not built on what are the requirements or the mission function, it's built on the voltage. And so we've tried to work with government before on that of what is your purpose? Do you want to launch ICBMs back if something happens? Well, that's a different set of critical infrastructure than having a crank path to bring back up the electric sector, or a different set of critical infrastructure on vaccine production and manufacturing and distribution. So the government's not quite good yet at knowing what is the actual requirement, and then therefore we can then figure out how to solve it. It gets right to the how. Here's the sites, this is what you need to do, here's the NIST framework, go apply this. And it's like, hold on, what are you trying to accomplish? And let's figure that out together.
Unfortunately, right now, critical infrastructure is as likely to be anything that the three of us say it is as anything we have defined in government.
So this was a follow-up question I had for you, Tara. Hospitals.
Absolutely.
Are hospitals critical infrastructure?
Raise your hand if you think hospitals are critical infrastructure. I have some bad news for you about IT in hospitals, especially rural hospitals. In 2017, we experienced two major cyber attacks. One was in May 12th, 2017, which was North Korea releasing a weapon that ended up attacking the British National Health Services, all the hospitals in the UK. And something along the order of, actuarially speaking, about 300 people died, about 13,500 appointments were canceled, cancer treatments went undone for weeks at a time. In June of 2017, we saw the NotPetya attack, which crippled 40% of the world's shipping for near 3 weeks. The challenge that we're having right now is that of all of the companies and organizations which were vulnerable to the underlying attack, it was called Eternal Blue from Microsoft, who'd actually patched it 2 months before these attacks came out. Of all the companies and organizations that were vulnerable to this attack in 2017, I and Jake Williams, another information security professional, just did a recent estimate. We think that approximately 15 to 16% of those organizations still are. 7 years later, right? And the answer to that has to do with medical equipment, critical infrastructure, and devices people need running more than they need patched. Many of these are hospitals that can't afford to patch, update, and handle their outdated equipment because they're serving a medical purpose. They're ultrasound machines, they're cameras, they're operational technology that Rob can tell you a lot more about. But the concern that I have is that so much of our infrastructure is running on outdated machinery that is being operated by people who are directly incentivized to not patch it, whether by being forbidden to by vendors or simply out of fear that if they turn it off, they won't know how to get it turned back on again. They don't have the technical expertise to make that happen. So I think we have a deep and fundamental problem in healthcare in this country that it revolves around the fact that in saving human lives, people often think of the technology as secondary. In reality, more and more of it is not only becoming connected, but crucial to keeping people alive, and that's where our vulnerabilities live. It was devastating to talk to some of the incident responders from WannaCry. I spoke to several of them in 2021, and I remember listening to a British IT responder in the National Health Service choke up and ask me if I thought he'd done the right thing by shutting off the technology that his doctors were using in the hospital he was servicing at the time. People were hurt one way or the other, but the thing that he remembered the most was that no one believed him about how serious the attack actually was.
And that, I think, Tara actually wrote a really beautiful paper with, for her Fulbright with Lord John Alderdice, specifically on the psychosocial impacts of first responders in cybersecurity incidents, and the fact that we need to be thinking about this much more seriously in terms of a field and how we help those individual human beings that are at the front line of that attack, because they are frequently like the random IT guy just shouting into the wind, and then everyone turning to them to fix it. And it causes true mental anguish. It's devastating. We have to turn to questions. I've already stolen 4 minutes of the audience's time for questions. So Phil, I just have one last question for you, and everyone online and here be thinking of your questions. Reminder that this is on the record. When you're hearing the challenges that Tara is describing, especially around the sort of operational components, and you're thinking of your role as a cloud provider that people are looking to like, I'm going to use Google Cloud because it's going to help keep me safe and it's going to help protect me. What are the connections there? Like, what are the fault lines that you can't protect against, and what can something like Google Cloud protect against?
So it's interesting. There's a thing in the cloud industry, and in fact, any kind of technology service provision, it's a thing that everybody calls shared responsibility, which is the cloud provider runs the base security infrastructure, and then everything else is the customer's responsibility. And look, that's kind of contractually correct, but we started talking about this in terms of shared fate rather than shared responsibility, and it informs a philosophy where we think all tech companies need to step across that line of shared responsibility and think about, are we shipping products with full safeties on so that customers then don't need to quickly turn some dials to make it secure? How do we think about making sure that some of the things that Tara described, which is our ability to provide service doesn't limit the customer's ability to keep things up to date, and how much of a responsibility is it us to keep things up to date for them. And the broader thing of that is there's a lot of disincentives in the ecosystem. Like, for example, if you update a medical device, there may be some rules that require that to be recertified, and you're kind of locked up for months in doing that. Collectively, as an ecosystem, we have to look at all of this and design it so things can be kept up to date, things can be kept segmented. The headwinds of well-intended rules that were designed for a previous era that stop us doing these things, we need to adjust those. And so I think we too easily focus on this as a purely technical problem, whereas it's actually more of a kind of a societal, organizational, cultural, kind of end-to-end systems problem. And I think the more we look at it like that, the better off we'll be. And
I think, Rob, that goes directly to your point as well. The people are making rational decisions based on a cost-benefit analysis for their particular situation. And I don't think that we've empowered folks to make that rational decision sort of on either side in a way that actually does truly balance the risks as well. With that, I have so many questions about ransomware and cybersecurity insurance and how AI increases threats and all these things, but I have to turn it over to the audience. So let me start, I'll start here, and maybe let's take like 2 or 3 questions at a time, actually. And yes.
Andrew Boreen with Flashpoint, CFR member, a long time. Say, I just wanted to mention, you had a great conversation about the persistent presence threats of major APTs like China, Russia, Iran, and what that means for the critical infrastructure and public-private kind of defense. A thing that is a lot on our mind at Flashpoint, on my mind, day to day, talking to international leaders, is the extortion ecosystem. The business interruptions that are being caused at hospitals, healthcare, construction firms, et cetera, from extortion and things moving into beyond just lock the data, unlock the data, into actual DDoS plus threatening families and taking the cyber into the physical in another direction. I'm just wondering if it would be possible to hear from each of the three of you on how big is that impact when we saw Lockbit take down $500 million in payments last year, and they might reinvest some of that in future capabilities.
Okay, great.
Thanks. Alan Rawls, Sidley Austin, and Harvard Law School. And my question actually follows on nicely yours, which is on the issue of detection of persistent threats. You've talked about secure by design to improve the state of security in advance and resiliency to help recover after you've had an incident. But what about detecting the persistent threats on critical infrastructure? I think you've all been referring, perhaps without naming, Volt Typhoon, a Chinese effort to place malicious software lurking in the background in various critical infrastructure and internet devices. Can we do a better job of detecting these threats? Perhaps AI will help do that. And is the role of the government being underplayed at the present time on that front, the detection front, or is that primarily a private sector issue, in your opinion?
Fantastic, thank you. And let's go over here, and then we'll take these three questions, turn them over to you all, and then we'll do another batch, including anyone who is online.
Good morning. Jonathan Cederbaum, GW Law School. I wanted to pick up on a point that Rob Lee made about the preferability of outcome-based regulations. My question has two parts. First, you mentioned FERC as a possible good example, some of the standards they used. If you could say a little bit more about that example, that would be great. But then flipping to the other side, what do you think of the obstacles that are preventing more agencies from following the outcome-based approach? Having worked on a lot of cybersecurity regulations in the government, I will suggest one reason, which is I think regulators find it more difficult in the first place to define outcomes, but second and more important, how to audit regulated parties when it comes to outcomes. So if you have ideas about how to overcome those obstacles or others, that would be great.
Great. Do you want rapid fire on all three?
Yeah, so just to bring it all together for folks, first of all, when you hear the phrase extortion ecosystems, what does that ecosystem actually look like for you all? I'd be interested in you all sort of defining that term. How are we thinking specifically around the persistent threats there? Because it's the year of our Lord 2024, we'll have to discuss whether AI increases offense or defense capacities. And then how do we think specifically about building policy and outcome-based policy around those? So, Rob.
Great. Extortion ecosystem, yeah, we're seeing you're seeing the same thing, right? Non-state actors and state actors influencing each other, sort of moonlighting where somebody's in the government using infrastructure during the day, at night they use the same infrastructure and capabilities to target people, shared resources back and forth. Yeah, we'll continue to see that grow. There was somebody that compromised a single email at Dragos and tried to make a big thing about it, and then emailed us saying, hey, we won't go public if you pay us. I was like, yeah, go public, it's fine, let's share. And it got intense enough where they started calling the teacher at my kid's school to threaten violence, trying to swap my house to try to get me killed, and a bunch of other things. And we were like, yeah, screw you, dude. And it was, law enforcement I love law enforcement, but it was almost completely useless during the whole situation. Like I called ahead to the police department saying, hey, if you get called swatting, or you're supposed to swat my house, I'm an active shooter, you're coming in guns blazing, what can I do to help you know that that's not true ahead of time? And they're like, nothing, we have to take it serious. I was like, okay, good to know. In terms of detection, when you look at infrastructure, that's exactly an issue that I focus on a lot. Biasedly, it's also where my company focuses a lot. You probably have about 95% of the budgets for all companies, small and large, dedicated towards enterprise IT. So about 5% is going to where you generate revenue and where you impact society. In that 5%, all the standards and regulations coming out from government are on prevention. Patch, passwords, antivirus, encryption, it's all prevention. And we looked at NIST cybersecurity framework and 6443 and a bunch of these standards. Literally about 95% of them are prevent, which means across identify, detect, respond, recover, companies are getting told to spend less than 5%. So I think it's a huge issue. We deployed our tech in a company that was actually one of the Volt Typhoon targets and found that they had been compromised for 300 plus days. So I don't think it's a topic of what do we need to do next in terms of AI or whatever. It's just do what we know to do, and we can be fun, sort of good about it. On AI, I think AI has a lot of interesting use cases, massively important to the sort of digital world in general. In cybersecurity, it's incredibly hyped up. And a lot of companies are doing things that are not AI, just claiming it AI because you get a market multiple bump in the market, that is. AI is really good when you have training data. Adversaries doing things is an inject into the training data. So the idea that you're going to use AI to detect threats, I think is probably ridiculous. But using AI to help automate workflows, to help make the defenders more proactive, absolutely. I hear a lot about AI-based attacks. I'm really looking forward to the first person that shows me one. And so then we can talk about it more. Social engineering and fake calls and things like that, absolutely. But AI targeting critical infrastructure and doing attacks, show me one and we'll look at it. Until then, I don't think it's worth the conversation. On the topic of regulation, it's exactly your answer. We are really good about creating regulation for auditors, not for the audited. It's very hard to audit outcomes. And so that is probably the main challenge on the what makes FERC a good example. FERC and NERC have this model, just to relate
What
for
do FERC
everybody.
and NERC stand for?
Just to relate it for everybody, the FERC is the Federal Energy Regulator for the United States, bulk electric system. So if you're like a big transmission substation or big generator, you're under FERC. FERC then also sort of delegated their authorities to an organization called NERC, which is the North American Energy Reliability Coordinator. It's a private sector organization with regulatory authorities, one of the very few in the country. And how it works is FERC will come out and say, here's why we're concerned. Here's what we'd like you to accomplish. Here's examples of what we think the how looks like, but we're not going to hold you to it. NERC, what do you think? The NERC pulls together members from each of the power companies, or 12 or 15 of the power companies together, and then says, well, we think your how is a little bit off. It wouldn't work that way, but we understand the why, and we tailor it this way, and as a result, this is what right looks like and back. And it goes back and forth, and FERC says that meets my intent or it doesn't, and just cycles and cycles, probably a 2 to 3 year process. And then when they say, okay, this is it, then there's economics, because now the utilities are able to pass that back to the rate. Your electric bill goes up by a penny, but they're able to go do the cybersecurity effort they have. So it's, here's the why, here's the what, work with industry on the how. Yeah, the auditing piece of it is a little bit more difficult, so we gotta be careful there, but it's also backed by the economics of it, and everybody knows why they're doing this. And the NERC CIP regulations, as an example, have very meaningfully up-leveled the electric system in the United States as a result. So that as a model is much better than TSA saying, hey, you have 24 hours, pipeline community, to give us feedback, and then we're going to implement all these IT security controls across your pipeline, which happened a couple years ago.
I am really struggling to maintain focus because I just keep thinking about what a Bluey episode would look like featuring NERC and FERC and their very heartfelt conversation. Phil, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll pick out just a couple of things just in the interest of time. So on the detect, absolutely. I think a lot of organizations are focusing more and more on detection. The one angle I think I would call out as a positive is the public-private partnership. So there's a lot of work across the industry, private sector to private sector, on sharing information about threats that prime everybody to detect. There's also an increased amount of collaboration, whether it's with the DHS Joint Cyber Development Collaborative and the NSA Cyber Collaboration Center. A lot of stuff going, and more importantly, there's a lot of stuff going on electronically rather than just people getting in a room and saying, what did you see, what did I see? And so we're becoming a much more industrialized in our collective detection, which is imposing cost on attackers. By no means anywhere near where we want it to be, but it's way better than it used to be. And so I think there's glimmers of hope there. On AI, I think that ultimately delivers a decisive defender's advantage. A little bit of risk of talking our own game because we're a massive AI provider and we have a lot of the data that's trained security-specific large language models. But we're seeing the early indications that that is going to deliver advantage when used in the right way. The thing on the outcomes regulation, so I don't disagree with the notion of outcomes-focused regulation, but I think we have to also move away from lagging indicators of performance like breaches, malware events, outages, more towards leading indicators of performance like how much we can reproduce our infrastructure, reproduce software, manage all those things that incidentally deliver massive adjacent commercial benefits, not just security and resilience. And one of the things, again, in the PCAST report, we called out that we need to radically shift from lagging indicators of performance measurement to leading indicators of performance measurement.
And Tara?
When I think about the extortion ecosystem, I think about the Noble Christmas Tree Farm, which is a farm that experienced a ransomware attack on their payment systems and weren't actually sure how you pay a ransom in Bitcoin. When I think about the extortion ecosystem, I think about a logistics company that is a client of one of our clients who experienced $300,000 in business email compromise. Agriculture companies, Christmas tree farms, the extortion ecosystem is our farmers being farmed for their money. And when I think about the way to prevent that, I do think about detection in advance of the situation, the posture of each of these organizations. And the challenge that I keep coming up with is that the current ways that we think about compliance and regulatory structures don't actually do the kind of detection that you're asking about. What they ask are questions that teach to the test, right? This is a compliance framework, and I have the entire structure of most of the US cybersecurity compliance and regulatory framework set up, crosswalked, and mapped in my head right now.
This is why she drinks.
It's why, it's why I drink irregularly and thoroughly when it happens. And the challenge we have is that on any of those frameworks, you never find a question like, is your home and work email password different? That's not a question that appears on any one of those frameworks. We ask that question of people. A question we often ask people, just the receptionist, is, do you feel safe in your workplace? It's not a question that appears on any of the regulatory questions, and yet that question, questions about how people are behaving in terms of cybersecurity, often elicits by far the most valuable information about the actual cybersecurity posture of any organization. And I've spent a lot of time kind of on the bleeding edge of information security. I've done stuff here and there. Let's not talk about that right now. And yet I found myself caring more and more about this baseline of what people need to do to keep themselves safe around the world. When I think about outcomes-based auditing processes, I am struck by the fact that these are checklists that we currently have as tools, and there's no match between the answers one gives and whether or not you actually got a better security result at the end of the day. I don't know if I'm the only person in this room who's actually a certified information security auditor, but I'm also an auditor. And so I keep this information in my head, and I keep seeing all the ways we could make this better, and I keep seeing us driving towards whether or not we can make a new shiny tool with AI to go find this information out. The answer is no, because the thing we have to do is start, for detection purposes, asking the questions that involve actually keeping people safe and eliciting information from the most sensitive orchestration and automation and telemetry we possess, which is the people that work at these organizations that know the posture.
It's there's such a long history of human-centered design and technology, and I wonder with regulation to what degree we think of auditee-centered design as opposed to auditor-centered design. Do you all think that it would be fair to say that at this moment, the extortion ecosystem, if you want to call it that, is essentially a cost of doing business in the United States?
I have an opinion on that, and it's going to be short and sweet. For enterprises, it's a cost of doing business. For small businesses, it is existential. They pay or they go out of business, and the 30 jobs they created are gone with them.
And what I think is so interesting about that is that as a country, we have worked so hard to develop a business ecosystem in which extortion is not a defining factor of how we grow and build businesses in this country. And it is a defining factor of how we define the political and economic stability of so many other countries around the world. And yet in this particular area, I think we've really lagged behind in ensuring that small businesses in particular and medium businesses are not having to grow against that particular business schema in a way that we would not allow in any other form, because policymakers are familiar with the other areas much more than they are familiar, I would say, with the extortion ecosystem.
Could I
Rob,
add
yeah.
that?
And then we'll move to more questions, I promise.
Just be purposely bombastic. You have to include vendors in that ecosystem, where there are a lot of vendors out there that their security features cost a lot more. And so we have very, very insecure products still going out into infrastructure because the more secure version costs so much more. And I don't know how that's not a form of extortion.
Totally.
Yeah, and in fact, this is one of the pleasing things, that we all, many of us signed up for with the DHS pledge. For many organisations that signed that, it was easy to sign it because we're already doing it. For some other organisations that signed it, they've got work to do. And I think, the organisations that do have I think that have the most challenges are the ones that Rob calls out, which is where you're selling a bunch of products and then you have an adjacent business that's selling a bunch of security products. To secure the products you've already just sold somebody is questionable.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question online?
We'll take our next question from Dana Lafon.
Oh, hi, Dana.
Hi, Dana.
Hi. Hi, Tara. Hi, everyone on the panel. Kat, thanks for doing this. This is a great panel. My name is Dana Lafon. I am the Council on Foreign Relations National Intelligence Fellow this year. And I also, my day job, I guess, is I work for NSA as their lead cyber psychologist. And I have a non-cyber psychology question for you for the panel. Currently, we have a massive machine that seems to manage government contracts and contracting, which seems to be dominated by the largest prime government contractors. Does this system get in the way of product delivery, particularly innovative cybersecurity products and services? And, because there's always an and, what would need to change, in your opinion, in this contracting ecosystem as it is today?
I love it, Dana. Okay, and do we have any more questions in the room? I'll take maybe two. Here and there. Sorry, we haven't gone to the back.
So then John Ackerley. John Ackerley, co-founder and CEO of Virtue Corporation. We have an election coming up. Should we feel good? This is for Rob. Our system's ready to go. And I thought Phil made a great comment about a certain company in Redmond. But anyway, we no, but really focused on the election question. Should we feel confident?
And back here.
Joe Hill recently retired from BlackRock. Are any of our allies, the Germans, French, Israelis, South Koreans, doing it better?
All right, so we have the government contracting machine. We have elections, and we have whether our allies are doing better. And I would throw into that mix for your consideration, have we done too much governing here with sticks and not enough with carrots? And so with that, Tara, maybe I'll start with you because I went the reverse direction up before.
There's a real challenge there when it comes to providing enough qualified, competent, capable supply into the supply chain for the defense industrial base. I love Dana's question, and it goes directly to whether or not we are governing our way out of innovation and competition at the level of small to mid-sized businesses. Is it possible to get into the supply chain for the U.S. military? It's a real challenge. One of the solutions for that is to pay attention to the GAO's recent reports, I think in 2019 and updated in 2021, 2022, which say that many of the current contractors for the DIB get waivers for their cybersecurity certification status because they had previously been compliant. And so even if they don't remain in that compliance, they often will receive a waiver. I think the rate in 2017, 2019 was 60% of them were non-compliant, but getting waivers anyway. This is the whole DIB, not just the ones applying for it. And now it's still high, around 40%. So removing that and making it an even playing field for all organizations based on their current cybersecurity posture would make a substantial difference, I think, in adding to the capacity and competition at the small to mid-sized level in the supply chain for the DIB. And then when it comes to the last part of the question, there's a deep responsibility, I think, that we all have to pay attention to what's happening. Phil and I had a great conversation just before this. There's a lot of people that are shocked, stunned, and dismayed to learn that cybersecurity is on their plate of responsibilities. And it's time we start to figure out where the buck stops in every organization and who takes responsibility. I'm thinking right at the moment of the fact that in SolarWinds, the CISO was charged and the company was charged, but somehow the boss of the CISO and the CEO weren't charged at all for any cybersecurity issues with SolarWinds. Why does the buck stop there if the budget didn't and the responsibility didn't and the legal responsibility didn't stop there. I'd like to know where that responsibility lies and who's willing to step up.
So I'll pick out a subset of the question. So on the question of kind of, other nations, I think, to your point earlier about the federalist approach in the US, other nations have an easier time of setting standards, with our complicated structure of federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial, all of this intermix of public and private across that makes it a lot harder, I think. When you look at some other countries, they have a much easier time. Interestingly, I don't think they always have enough, as much success as you would expect with that easier time, largely because a lot of countries around the world intermix a set of concerns around privacy, data localization that sometimes work against resilience in inadvertent ways. I think in the US, at least, we've kept kind of, in some ways, there's some good silos between these disciplines while we still have to cross silos a little bit. But when you intermix, geopolitics with security, it tends not to get to the right outcome. I think on the question of kind of you getting to with incentives, I think we don't do enough to educate business leaders and government leaders. The fact that, well, it's okay to keep saying security and resilience is, it's an obligation, it's a loss avoidance, it's for rules and regulation, it's for your duty as a good leader. I think that only gets you so far. I think we need to educate people more that doing security and resilience well actually does confer some real business benefits. And again, I touched on this before with the moving from lagging to leading indicators. I'll just very, very quickly pick one example. If an organization can manage all of its software and reproducibly build it and deploy it in an effective way, that gives you significant security and resiliency benefits. But the main reason for doing it is it actually gives you increased ability to deliver product, meet customer demands, reduce cost, increase efficiency, drive product, and be a better business. And if you do it in that approach, then you get the security and resilience as part of doing that. I think we need to reframe every single security discussion around why would you do it for the adjacent business benefits? Do the thing that creates the security, not just do the security. And I think that will get us in some way to resolve this incentives problem that we seem to have.
Fantastic. And Rob?
Yeah, from a incentives perspective, and then work the questions backwards. So from an incentive perspective, I do think it's appropriate for there to be a base level of regulatory oversight on infrastructure providers. I should not be able to accept risk as a company that is borne by the community members outside my fence line, okay? Now defining that's the tricky part, but I do think there needs to be a baseline of regulation and sort of a stick, and that's missing in some areas, in some industries. But then absolutely much more on the carrot of if you are doing this, you can actually benefit. And economics, I love the be a better business, but like people like money. There's power companies that deploy security products and get a 6% rider on the capital return. They make money deploying security products that make their infrastructure and make their community more safe and secure. Guess which ones are leading the discussion? It's not hard to pick out. On the topic of allies, yeah, I definitely agree some have it easier in terms of like size and scope as well, and they don't always achieve the same outcomes, but there are some doing very well in different areas. Australia, as an example, is doing very well with the SOCI regulation in terms of having conversations that go to a board level. So the board must sign off the risk management plan for the operations infrastructure at those countries or companies. You look at Saudi Arabia, they've gone very like, hey, we don't have the time for this. We've seen America try to ask, we're going to go to the companies and tell them they're doing this, and we'll just provide them the direct resources, but they're going to make these investments, and if you don't, we'll come in and do it for you. Maybe a little draconian, but it's having effect. And probably one of my favorite ones is in Singapore. They launched a regulatory regime for their critical infrastructure asset owners and operators. They're able to identify all of them. Like there's a smaller set in Singapore. They bring them all together. They say, here's the regulation. You have a voice in it. Let's work together on it. It is outcomes focused. Now what do you need? Let's go. And government will lead by example, which honestly, sometimes I think is what hurts us in the US. You'll get a federal agency saying, you should do this, you should report your incidents faster, you should do that, and then the same crap happens in the government, you look like hypocrites. So at least Singapore is sort of leading by example on that topic. And in terms of election infrastructure, so the systems themselves, sure, you could find a bunch of vulnerabilities, and as a cybersecurity person, I'd love to talk about the systems, but the problem with the elections has nothing to do with the technology and the systems at this point. We've eroded every ounce of confidence the American voter has in like anything they're being told. You can watch events on TV and somehow it's political to talk about the fact that there was an insurrection in this country. So I think we're screwed, but I don't think it has to do with cyber attacks. So I think there's basic education and critical thinking that needs to be applied, and there's politicians, and this is the piece I hate most. If you have an opinion, that's fine. If it disagrees with mine, I'm fine with that. But if you're positioning a position or an opinion that's not actually yours because you think it's good for ratings or whatever, I think that is the death to democracy. And there's a lot of senators I hang out with on Republican and Democrat, and I go back in the bar, have a cigar, and everyone's on the same page. And then you go on the screen, it's WWE. You know, I mean, I think everybody but Ted Cruz is pretty nice in Congress. So like, let's figure out how to go show that to the American public. You worked, my last committee hearing was Garbarino and Swalwell, Republican and Democrat, working together on how do we take care of water infrastructure across the country. That doesn't get the airtime, so they're not incentivized to do that, but it's bipartisan and it works. And so I would like to see a lot more bipartisanship and start teaching people to like have basic elements of respect. Like I can't have my 6-year-old watch any of the election debates. Isn't that silly? So I think there's a huge issue with the election that's upcoming where any adversary can do anything and the other party that benefits will grab onto it and amplify it instead of saying, hey, this is a strategic adversary to the US trying to hurt us. I think that's the problem, not cyber.
And on that note, on allies, I want to say everyone should stick around for our next session, which is going to be great, transatlantic cooperation, US-EU cyber trust mark. We're going to take a 15-minute break, but I think my takeaway from this whole panel is 2 things. One, I am so proud and grateful to our panelists because I used mom voice on them before this panel about acronyms, and they came through in spades. There were really so few acronyms, and I am just so proud of you all. So thank you for that. And I didn't have to do like giraffe jargon once, or jargon giraffe. And second, I think my takeaway from this is how deeply human the problems that we are dealing with are, how deeply fundamentally societal they are. They are the types of things we have governed for centuries, and it's a new modality and there are new complexities to it, but meeting people where they are, giving small business and small business owners the dignity and the respect that they deserve, leading by example, asking people to do as we do and not just do as we say. These are all really, I think, critical components of the leadership that we need at this time. And the politicization of what is a true fundamental national security and national unity question for us, the cheapening of that for political points and hype cycles is not in anyone's interest. And so as a community, whatever we can be doing to, I think, reset that conversation and demand more of those who are in charge of decision making at this point is also, for me, something that I really take away from this panel, that we should demand and expect more of our leaders in terms of the way that they talk about this and the seriousness with which they hold it in private and, importantly, in public. And so with that, I want to thank our amazing panelists. Phil, I want to congratulate you on PCAST being out. I know that the report was a big lift.
Yep.
And so it's a really exciting thing to be out there in the world. I encourage everyone to read it. And yes, go enjoy coffee, get some fresh air, and hopefully we'll see you back at 10:45. Thank you, everyone.